Welcome back to The Move, where I've been through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that one time in the Bible that God rewarded an arrogant jerk who snitched on his brothers. If you're wondering what we're talking about, Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 11, we're talking with Pastor Kessia Rain. I was thinking about all the times that I've seen this story kind of depicted in children's films, and it almost always seemed to position Joseph, rather, as I was going to say Jacob, and I realized that I wrote in my notes wrong, that it always positioned Joseph as like the good person and the brothers as kind of unreasonable and kind of just, mean-spirited or whatever the case is. But reading through the 11 verses today, I thought, he kind of had it coming, didn't he? He's a little bit of a punk. And maybe selling your brother into slavery, which, spoiler alert, that's next episode. Maybe that's an overreaction, but I can understand the impulse. I don't know if you have younger siblings or people in your life that kind of were the tattletale in your life. I don't know. I feel like I kind of resonate with the brothers a little bit on this passage, more than I want to kind of like, maybe there's some kind of counseling I need to go through in order to handle that. But I definitely felt like, yeah, he had it coming. You
just called Joseph a punk?
I did. I think that's the biblical term. That's the Hebrew for it.
That's right. I have the Hebrew here. So which verse is that? No. Yeah, I can be a little bit sympathetic because what the Bible has told us straight up, like maybe you're reading through the lines at first, but then it actually tells us in chapter 37, verse 3, that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children.
Right.
So we don't even have to just infer from the narrative, like, I don't know, maybe Jacob had a favorite. Like, no, definitely Joseph was his favorite. And so that shows up in at least one way. He gets this special gift, this kind of royal robe with all these colors on it. And the other brothers out here, working hard, being sons, and a lot of them older than Joseph and not feeling like they're really getting the recognition or affection or respect, admiration, love, whatever it is from their father Jacob. So that's going to position their hearts, probably set them up for envy, which is what we see play out.
Well, envy, yes, but also verse 2, this is something that I maybe never really focused on, but Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Like, Joseph was a snitch. Like, he definitely was like with binoculars looking in at his brothers like, ooh, I'm telling daddy what you guys did. And it's like, dude, come on, like bro code. Like, I feel like that's kind of one of the unspoken but understood rules of having siblings. It's just like, you don't snitch on each other. Like, you kind of like give each other that space to make mistakes or whatever the case is, to get away with things. And here's goody two shoes Joseph, the favorite kid, who's coming over here to tattle on us again. It's just like, I just feel like, man, Joseph had some growth, has some growing to do. And it's interesting because there's an observation that I've heard made, and I'm wondering if it was written down somewhere in kind of one of our, by one of the people in our church who's kind of very revered. And it was this idea that Joseph is perhaps one of the like unblemished characters of the Old Testament, in the sense that like they really represent Jesus. And I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I got the sense in the way that Joseph was described and growing up in church that Joseph was like one of these few people who you couldn't find fault with. And then I read the passage, I'm like, no, there's some things here that like maybe aren't technically sin, but are not virtues, I would say.
Well, that is one way to interpret it, and it might be right.
Okay, so how did you read? How did you interpret this?
Well, as I'm like, okay, it doesn't tell us what kinds of things the brothers were doing that Joseph was telling on them for. Like, is this like, well, they're eating some of the grain while they're harvesting it, like, True. Okay, that would be petty.
Yeah.
Then you're like, Joe, like, not cool. But given the behavior of the brothers that we see a little bit before this chapter, literally slaughtering people, sleeping with his father's maidservant, Bilhah. Remember, Reuben does this.
Yeah.
We see Judah, how he treats Tamar. And anyway, they sell him into slavery. A lot of stuff is going on here that, like, given the brothers' track record, like, it could have been petty on Joseph's part. It could have been more significant. Like, I'm not willing to trust the brothers based on what I know of them. Like, I'm thinking bro code could maybe not have covered whatever it is that Joseph is talking about. You
I
know what
think
I
that
mean?
that's fair. I think that that's fair. In the child cartoon that I remember having watched growing up, the story was that they left the field that they were working in to go swim in the river. And so from that level, if that's the
Oh,
perspective, it feels like bro code does definitely applies. But you're right. They've slaughtered entire villages. They've been having like kind of these weird sexual escapades. They've been doing things like selling him into slavery later on. So, okay, maybe I should retract or at least be willing to put an asterisk by this interpretation. Maybe,
yeah.
maybe they were actually caught up in some actual foolishness where accountability was important.
Yeah. I mean, just with murder and trafficking and adultery on your record, I'm just saying I'm inclined to believe Joseph on this one.
They probably didn't steal a candy bar from the 7-Eleven.
Yeah, that's probably it. But it does say, your reaction, I think, um, does it does take on the viewpoint of the brothers, which I think is one of the goals of the narrative.
Oh, okay.
It's not, I don't think it's trying to be, again, 100% like fairy tale like. It is showing us
Hmm.
there are some complicated dynamics. It's setting us up for the narrative that's going to come, of course, to let us know why would the brothers do something like what they're about to do. I'm assuming you've got brothers, right, Justin?
Hmm.
They've probably been super annoying to you sometime, not now, of course, now you live totally in peace. But at
Everything's
one
great.
time, I bet your siblings were annoying to you. And yet, you never sold them to Midianite traders.
That's true. If there's something that I need to put on my job applications, my CV, that's one of those things that I can claim, and it
Yeah.
is true.
Character reference, never sold any of my siblings for money and then lied to my parents that actually they were murdered
Hmm.
or killed by a wolf or whatever. So it is sort of taking us into their viewpoint to understand their motivations. But I don't think the narrative will ever honor their motivations.
Mm-hmm. This is something that we're seeing a lot more in, I guess, modern superhero stories, is that there's a sympathetic villain. This idea that, like, okay, we are not saying that what that villain did is good or meaningful, but we're saying that we can understand how they got to that place. And I think it's an attempt to get us to think reflectively on how we play a role in society. I'm thinking specifically of like the Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix one. I'm not saying that I endorse the film. It's a rather violent one. So if you're squeamish on that, don't watch it. But I think the point of the film was there's this kind of madman who emerges on the scene, but he didn't emerge in a vacuum. That there was a whole system of things that were kind of placed on his back that led him to a breaking point. And not that it justifies him murdering or doing crazy things, but it's understandable that when we respond to people as though they don't matter, we discount them and we abuse them, that there's going to be some kind of natural consequence of it. And so I think what I'm hearing you saying is that this passage is setting us up in such a way that we can understand why Joseph is going to go through some hardship because of factors in his life, because of the favoritism of his father, because of the way that the personal dynamics have been kind of devolving over the course of however many years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what is interesting about this story is, this is really about Joseph starting to have these dreams. He has these two dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, nothing much really happens in this. This is kind of like the prelude or the prologue to the final section of Genesis. So we're here at a hinge point.
Hmm.
And there are a few clues for that. And one of them is actually verse 1. Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan where his father had sojourned. So his father was
Mm-hmm.
like a traveler through this land. Jacob is the first one to kind of settle down, right? Now we know it's not going to last. That's another spoiler, I guess, but he's not going to get to stay there or live there, live out his life there, but he's finally getting settled. Okay, transition point. Now we have, this is the history of Jacob's family. That's how the New Living Translation puts it. But in the Hebrew, it uses this word that's one of the theme words of Genesis, and it's toledot.
Okay, toledot. What does that mean?
Toledot, and it means generations. And so you see this in, it says, this is the generations of the heavens and the earth. These are the generations of Noah, the generations of Abraham. So that word generations is kind of the theme of the book. This is where we're going to
Hmm.
get origin stories. This is where we're tracing lineages to see how it's going to play out in these huge canvases across history. And so this whole section, 37 through the end of the book, these are the Toledot, the generations of Jacob. Now, a
Hmm.
lot of this narrative is going to focus around Joseph. And it's kind of strange because he's just one of Jacob's 12 sons. And
Right.
yet, more time in Genesis is spent telling his story than on any of the other patriarchs. More
Hmm.
chapters, more words written on Joseph than on Jacob or Isaac or Abraham or anyone else before him.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, but it's sort of setting up the theme, not just of, okay, this is some interesting stuff that happens to Joseph, but what we're going to see play out is the theme really of the entire Old Testament, the theme of the Pentateuch, the theme of the whole Bible, really, which is about something planned for evil turning to good, themes of
Hmm.
redemption and reconciliation. So there's kind of a fall and a breaking of relationship, disaster upon disaster upon disaster. And then there's redemption, vindication, and restoration. This is where we see they will end up back in the promised land, but it's going to come through Joseph. We're also going to see here. This is sort of like, let's see the depths of sin. So then we see how God is going to turn this for good. So the whole themes of scripture are really in this section about Joseph. So it's interesting. We get to trace this historical story that then plays out in a huge way across all of Israel, and then even bigger in the history of all of humanity and the redemption of Jesus. That one brother, of course, who redeems us and God continues to work it for good. And that theme again repeated where that brother that was not the oldest, that was not the most privileged, ends up with the most privilege, ends up with the blessing.
Hmm. Hmm. This is exciting. From what you're describing, it sounds like this story is a very important story for us to be focusing in on, and clearly because, like you said, more ink has been dedicated to his specific story arc. So I think this is gonna be fun. I do have something that I saw when I was kind of preparing for or studying for this chapter. Jonathan in previous episode recommended a book which I finally picked up. Maybe you're familiar with it. I don't know. It's called the Pentateuch as Narrative. Have you seen this one before? He
I have
refers to it
not.
as the cheat
Is that
sheet for the
Walton?
move. This is John H. Sailhammer.
Oh,
Sailhammer.
Sailhammer. Great.
Yeah. And one of the things that he was pointing out, which I had never heard before, was this idea of the colorful coat, that there's actually a bit of debate as to if that's the best translation. The alternative is, yeah, there's a coat of many colors, but the alternative was it's a coat with very long sleeves. And I don't know, I'm sure thematically it's not as important as all the things that you just said, but I thought it was interesting that there's some debate on what exactly was the gift and what the privilege was.
Yeah, what we do know in either of those cases is that that would be exceptional.
Hmm.
Most tunics like this or robes are going to be short sleeved, maybe knee length, probably a drab color because color was super hard to come by back then. So this was really luxurious, extravagant, and really putting ourselves, if we can put ourselves into a shame and honor scenario, if we can kind of put
Mhm.
our minds there in that kind of a culture, um, Jacob is honoring Joseph above his brothers and thereby shaming the rest of the brothers. And then when
Hmm.
Joseph tells on the brothers, he's shaming them to their father. So their shame deepens.
Hmm.
Um, and then he tells these dreams in which he is being honored above everyone, even above his own parents. It was like ridiculous. It was ludicrous. It was outrageous. And it stoked the feeling of envy that the brothers
Right.
had. And one of the things I think that I want to offer is maybe some good news here to people is if, like Justin, you need to talk with a professional about your feelings about this passage because it's really stirring up some stuff from your past. um, the brothers in this villain origin story had a lot more choice than they would have given themselves credit for.
Hmm.
We do not actually need to be victims of envy. Even when
Hmm.
other people are honored above us, even when other people have more privilege or higher position or more popularity or whatever it is, those brothers gave into that envy, but we don't have to. We can choose a different path. We can be content, we can be secure, we can be grateful for what we have and not fall into that brotherly trap. So if there's a Joseph in your life that you're like, why does this guy, it's like one win after another, like, it's so annoying. Like, hey, let's check that, because we don't have to be jealous of God's blessings on that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you are considering whether or not you should sell that person into slavery, we would offer a caution. No, maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah, please refrain.
Yeah.
Resist the urge.
And these are the kind of world-changing conclusions that people subscribe to the Move for. Things exactly like that. And I'm just so glad that we get to be the voice of reason.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes. The news you needed today. But yeah, so I think this is cool. I'm glad that I got to jump in at the top of this narrative with you, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen in the days to come as we keep diving into Joseph here. And we are hurtling toward the end of this book. Do you feel how fast it's coming?
It is accelerating quite quickly, and it's hard to think that, we started a season that's very likely in the 100 or so range of episodes, and this is episode number 65. So we have been trudging along, and it's been such a joy, such a privilege. Next episode, we get to conclude the rest of Genesis chapter 37, and so I am very excited to be able to do that. Guys, thank you all for hanging out with us. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your observations in the text. So definitely let us know what stood out to you in the comments below this video.